All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is chapter 10. My name is Antoine Demps. I will be doing the introduction for our chapter 10 podcast for the day. Um, so this chapter emphasizes the value of students having actively collective evidence of their academic growth and reflect on the process of their progress over time rather than simply receiving grades and moving on. On this chapter, it aligns well with what we want our classrooms to look like, more modern. Students should take more time to have more responsibilities for their learning journey and understanding their strengths and identify areas for improvement. Um, so to introduce the objectives that we have, objective number one is to identify prerequisites to successful student record keeping. Number two is to describe how students can record information from assessments, from assignments and assessments, including strategies and structures to support meaningful documentation. Number three, we got explain how writing and learning journals support student reflection and assessment for learning, as in how learners articulate their thinking, metacognition, and next step goals. Number four, describe how students can collect evidence in a portfolio, including understanding the benefits of portfolios, the type of portfolios, enunciations of sample work, of work samples, and how students' involvement enhances meaning. And then the last one, number five, explain how periodic statements, student reflection on evidence supports their ownership of learning and how teachers can facilitate reflective routines tied to evidence collected. All right, so I have objective number one, and to reinstate it, it is identify the prerequisites to successful student record keeping, um, with what students need in place to effectively collect and reflect on learning evidence. So, the first objective in this chapter focuses on guiding students to gather meaningful evidence in their learning, emphasizing that students must learn how to intentionally collect work that demonstrates growth and mastery rather than simply storing completed assignments. So to meet this objective successfully, there are several key prerequisites students need to take place before they can effectively collect, and reflect learning evidence. First, our students, they need to have a clear understanding of learning expectations that we have for them. They must know what mastery looks like, so we must give examples. They must know the standards that we are working towards and the purpose behind the collecting the evidence. So without clarity, students may save work randomly instead of selecting pieces that illustrate meaningful growth in their academics. Um, Second, students need structured systems and organization tools to maintain records over time. This may include folders or digital portfolios, checklists, or even teacher-provided templates that we may give them that may help them know what to keep and where to keep it and how often to update it. When students lack organization, record keeping becomes inconsistent and reflection becomes surface level because they cannot easily track their own development process. Another important prerequisite that is student skill assessment. This chapter highlights that students must be taught how to evaluate their own work, identify their strengths, and also areas of improvement. Not only rely on just our feedback, they need language, reflection prompts, and models of quality work to build this skill up. Assessment gives meaning to evidence they collect because it helps student understanding why they're saving this work. Students also need opportunities for guided reflection, especially when learning is the process. Reflection is not intuitive for students. It must be modeled and practiced. So pretty much having regular routines like conferences or written reflections or even brief self-evaluations, it can help our students internalize the habit of examining the learning and thinking critically about their processes. So pretty much students require just a sense of ownership and responsibility for their learning. pretty much when our students understand their record keeping is not a compliance task, but also a personal growth tool, they become more invested in culturalizing their work and articulating their own journey. And that's all I got.
All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ryan Allen. I have objective number two. Objective number two is describing how students can record information from assignments and assessments, including strategies and structures to support meaningful documentation. So in this section, of chapter 10, it explains that students should be passive recipients of grades. They should be active members of their own evidence of learning. Um, Recording information from assessments and assignments means that helping students capture what each task reveals about their progress toward learning targets in clear and meaningful ways. The chapter also stresses that teachers must first establish a structure for student record keeping. A simple system such as tracking sheets or data logs, or digital portfolios organized by the specific learning target that they're focused on, and not by the assignment names. So this helps students to focus on what they learned rather than what they completed. For each assignment or assessment, students should be able to record the learning targets assessed, stated in student-friendly language. They should be able to the level of performance or rubric score earned, feedback or evidence explaining why that level is achieved, and a brief reflection of the next step or goal. So through this routine, students start to see patterns, strengths, gaps, and trends, making the record a living document of growth rather than a static grade list. The process also builds metacognitive skills, so learners analyze their results and interpret feedback, and they're able to set improvement goals. The teacher's role is also to model, scaffold, and guide students in how to interpret results correctly. Teachers might also provide templates or examples of reflection statements. Um, and over time, students assume greater responsibility, making the system increasingly student-driven. So the whole purpose is to get the students to be able to take over and keep their own record. Ultimately, the chapter frames the record keeping process as a bridge between the assessment and the learning ownership. When students record and interpret their own data, they are able to begin to see an assessment as a tool for growth rather than for judgment. And then it turns grades into guidance and feedback into action. And that is all I have for objective two.
Yeah. Good afternoon. My name is Jolanda Ware. I'm an EC general teacher assistant, EC teacher for third grade through fifth grade at Peck Expeditionary. My objective was objective number three, and it discussed explain how writing and learning journals support student reflection and assessments for learning, as well as how learners articulate their thinking, metacognition, and next step goals. So what I did note is that when students are supposed to be learning, ultimately their sense of progress they have made and anything that they are confused about and questions that they have, this ultimately helps them monitor their progress as well as keep them focused on their own goals and helping monitor their own progress. And I don't want to keep saying the same thing because my notes are repetitive, because of course I have EC students. So all of the assignments and assessments that we do utilize for learning targets, they should accurately reflect achievement and intended learners targets. And it should be noted that if students do track their progress, again, the results that they see will help them track and accurately represent their level of achievement. And once they understand their levels of achievements, then that helps them focus more on continuing to grow and progress. Another thing that they noted is that students do need to know which learning target is represented by each assignment or assessment, or which parts are aligned to which targets, because they will need to be able to use the work itself as a resource when reflecting on what they have learned. Third, students must understand the standards of quality use to judge their work, again, because they will need to refer to them, and then what they reflect on, as well as what they've learned. And fourth, Teachers must keep an eye on student progress, intervening with guidance and reteaching when efforts do not result in advancement. And it went on to say that a student who has done everything assigned that is not making progress is not in a good position to reflect on growth or improved achievement. So a learning journal is a place like a portfolio, not necessarily a portfolio, but it's like a notebook, or it could even be a digital file where you write things about what you learn, how you think about it, and what you want to do next. So learning journals ultimately help students notice their own thinking as well as show teachers and students another way of connecting and communicating. Writing and learning journals also help students think, learn, and plan their writing. It helps them put down what they did, what they thought, and ultimately what they want to learn next. It also helps students in three big ways: articulating their thinking. Writing their thoughts, allows students to explain the steps that they took into solving a problem or how you understood a story. This is something that could be done in math. So learning journals are also appropriate across the academic border in multiple subjects. And when you put ideas into words, you see them more clearly. So that deals with students who may be visual or actual physical learners. Or students that are hands-on learners. That's what I'm trying to say. The metacognition is thinking about students' thinking, which requires them to think about their thinking. Journals do help students notice what they learn best. They're also able to write about the strategies that worked and which didn't. So that targets a little bit of the metacognition of this objective. Um, and showing progress for assessment for student learning also helps the teacher with instruction as well as planning intensive interventions. And I'm going to the question. The question that I had was question number 4. What part of the chapter makes you feel uncertain, nervous, or hesitant about applying in practice? One thing about writing journals is that when I have students that have deficits in writing and that struggle with like letter names and letter sounds, it's kind of difficult to get them to write and articulate. We're already learning, so sometimes them pouring into the learning journal, it would be something that we would target because it takes a lot for them to write as well. So just in different ways for it to not take up so much time. That's one thing that would make me uncertain, and just making sure that students know how to write in their learning journal and how to use it appropriately. So I guess it would be something that would be beneficial for middle school students or my older students, but not necessarily my third grade students. So that was my objective, and that was a little bit of what I discussed.
I am Olympia Smyre, and I had objective 4, describe how students can collect evidence in a portfolio, including understanding the benefits of portfolios, types of portfolios, annotations of work samples, and how students' involvement enhances meaning. So first, I had to know that a portfolio, is simply a collection of work assembled so that it tells a story and shows the capabilities of the student and the variety of stories about their learning. So it kind of tells how they learn. The benefits of a portfolio is to be able to get the evidence of the student's achievement and to see examples with feedback about the quality of their achievement, self-assessments, drafts, and revisions, students' reflections of their own growth. Um, Also, misconceptions, knowing the misconceptions of portfolios was very important in my section. Sometimes we think that portfolios can be a collection of assessments. That's not necessarily true. And there was a quote that said the greatest power of a portfolio in a classroom assessment is resides in its ability to make incremental changes in achievement visible over time. So the different types of portfolio are celebration portfolios that showcase the student's best work, what the student is most proud of, what the students like the best. It also can be used as a keepsake You can invite the students to create a personal collection of their favorite works. They may use this portfolio to communicate with their family about things that they are best proud of, things. This is a good place to begin when you are creating a portfolio. So things that they are proud of, those are things that you may want to have them collect. They will be able to develop a sense of what makes good work, so they can see what makes good work. It puts students in a touch with their own strengths and interests, helps them make good choices about collecting different work samples. Growth portfolios, this illustrates progress towards mastery of one or more learning targets. Students collect some every so often, so throughout like different weeks of the period. They are able to collect this, and then they are able to show level of proficiency and how it increases throughout the learning target. You keep different samples of like right in beginning at the beginning of the year, and then add samples throughout the year to show improvement. Evaluation should be held over time to show different points of improvement throughout the year. It also includes like written self-reflection. So the students should be able to have like self-reflection to see that they've made different growth throughout the year, which describes changes of achievement and capabilities. Then you have project portfolios, which documents completion of steps in a project conducted over time. You would need to see evidence of engaging in each step of the project. So that's what they need to collect, different samples of the different steps of the project. They will use descriptions of the work done over extended time. They must have evidence to show that they did the project well. So not just like not just pictures and things of the project, but to be able to show that they understood what they were doing within the project and that they knew how to do the project well. Then you had achievement status portfolios. This will allow decision makers to see what may come next. So the teacher will be able to see what they need to give the student next by collecting these samples. Once a level of achievement is met, then so basically you take that standard or whatever that goal is and you test it again or you show it again. And then they're able to see that this is where they need to grow next. This is where they need to move next. And then you take that first sample and you get rid of it and you put the new sample there. Then you will be able to take this particular portfolio and carry it from grade to grade. So they're able to take it from kindergarten to first grade to second grade to third grade. A lot of times you use this portfolio, it can be used for graduation. So they use achievement status portfolios for graduation. Then in this portfolio, they use work sample and annotations. Students are able to give their own selected reflections of how they did. So they're able to give reflections of how they did. When parents come to see those particular samples, they're able to see what the story is telling. They're able to give the comments need to match the evidence, and it can be linked to what they're learning. When they are required, when I think when students are required to articulate, they're able to understand what the purpose of their learning is. Annotations can take the form of the I can statement. So they can use the I can statements to help them annotate what they are trying to do. And then involving students in selecting portfolio entrants gives them a responsibility in their growth in their learning capabilities. They know themselves better, so they're able to explain their own work better. They're able to explain what they were doing. They're able to explain what they were trying to do better when they're able to collect their own data and their own examples. And then they're able to give themselves a positive self-image. Although the teacher is in charge of what they need to present, they're still able to give those things out a little bit better in a positive light. And then you want to involve your students more, which gives them an ownership and also helps them explain their selections better. and then they are able to talk about their own evidence in a more confidence way. But you want to model that process first, which allows them to analyze and reflect on what they are doing. And that is all I have.
My name is Shemai Muhammad, and I had objective number 5, and that says explain how periodic student self-reflection on evidence supports their ownership of learning and how teachers can facilitate reflective routines tied to the evidence collected. So basically what that was saying is how student reflection can help students take ownership, and then what can teachers do to support them in that. And basically, when students take time to reflect on their own work, they're not just waiting for grades or feedback from the teacher, but instead they're thinking on what they learned and how they learned it and what they still need to work on. So that kind of reflection just helps them understand that learning is not something that happens to them, it's just something that they can also control. And just an example of that would be after just completing an assignment or a test, they can look at their results and ask themselves questions like, what did I do well, or where did I get stuck, or what can I try next time? And over time, that just helps them become more confident and independent learners. And that way they know themselves how they can improve and what they need to improve on instead of the teacher telling them that. Um, Teachers, they can make reflection a normal part of class by setting up just simple routines. I think one way would that would be like the reflection journals, like how we talked about, and just give them a few sentences to write about what they learned each week, or even just setting goals for themselves and then having short talks with them students about those goals. Um, and then with those goals, teachers are able to make that for new assignments and stuff like that, just to keep it going. Teachers could also use rubrics or checklists just to see where the students are at, and then giving the students clear criteria, and so they can compare their work to those standards. Um, when students see their progress in like real evidence, it's not just like a number or a letter, but they can understand like their growth more deeply. And just to say about like the teacher facilitating that reflection, it shouldn't, like, the reflection should happen regularly. It shouldn't just be something that happens at the end of the term. It should be ongoing throughout the year. And like when students get that often reflection, they're able to build their habits of self-assessment and self motivation. And then they can see that themselves, they're able to improve, and then they can understand what they need to do next themselves. So basically, self reflection is just allowing feedback and like stuff like that to be a learning tool instead of it just being judgment. And it just, when a teacher could create structured self reflection for the kids, it just helps them become like lifelong learners. And that's all I got.
All right, so then we can move on to the critical reflection. Um, so I had a question number 1. So, which ideas in this chapter did you find most convincing or useful, and why? So for me, the most convincing and useful idea in this chapter is that students should take an active role in collecting and reflecting on the evidence of their learning, rather than just relying solely on teachers to interpret the assessment results for them. The chapter makes a good case that talks about that when students track their progress, record results from assignments, and analyze what those results mean, they begin to view learning as a process they can control, not something that they're simply just happens to them. So something equally as powerful is that the emphasis on making learning visible, by maintaining journals, logs, and portfolios that are organized around the learning targets. Students can literally see their growth unfold in front of them. This happens, excuse me, this helps them connect daily tasks to large learning goals and recognize improvement over time. It also turns grades and feedbacks into tools for self-direction for the students. So students can begin asking questions like, what can I do to improve instead of like, what grade did I get? Um, Another useful idea for me in this chapter was the use of the structured reflection. So having students write brief reflections after each major assessment, describing what they did well, what challenged them, and what strategies they'll try next. That all of that together kind of builds metacognitive awareness for the students. And these small moments of reflections cultivate lifelong learning habits and strengthen accountability for the students. And lastly, the chapters focus on portfolios. I thought that was something that stood out to me. The chapters focus on portfolios is both practical and inspiring. It gives the students ownership of their work. It provides concrete evidence of progress and creates meaningful opportunities for goal setting conversations between teachers, students, and the students' families. So overall, the chapter's most convincing message is that the assessment becomes truly powerful only when students themselves become participants in documenting and interpreting their learning, turning record keeping into an act of empowerment rather than compliance. And that was all I had for the question number one.
And I had question number 2, which was uh-oh, my book. How does this chapter align with or challenge your own beliefs about teaching and learning? And I have to agree with Ron when it talks about not wanting students to just think about what grade they have. You want them to be looking towards like what they need to improve. So it talks about students being able to collect their own samples to show what level of proficiency they have that has increased with their learning targets, and being able to keep samples of writing from the beginning of the year and then collect those things so that they can be able to see how they have improved throughout the year. Um, that kind of aligns with the way I believe. Going throughout my year, I feel like students should be able to see what they're doing, and then we should be able to give them feedback to go with it. And they also need to be able to collect their own feedback and gather their own feedback and give themselves their own reflection of how they are doing, which is also one of the things that they also need to be able to do. I think it was the achievement status one. And then having the work sample annotations where they reflect on their own work samples. And then when they present it to their parents or present it to anybody, then you can kind of see this is what I collected and this is the why I collected it. And this is where I have grown in. So I believe in that as well. That kind of aligns with how I am teaching and how I am growing my students to be able to take that information, gather their own portfolio, put it together and collect that in their file, and then be able to write their own notes along with my notes, and then gather what else do they need to do to grow, so that when you're asking them what do you need to grow on, what are the things that you need to learn, they have those examples and then they have those feedback, and then they are seeing themselves more in a positive light, as it says in the book.
Okay, and I had question 3. And just to restate it, it says, which strategy or idea from this chapter would you feel most confident implementing and why? And I would say portfolio tracking. Um, I think somebody else said this earlier, but it doesn't turn. It's just not just an assessment, but it makes it a story. Um, and I just think that instead of in focus on a single grade or a single test score, students can actually see like their development, whether it be from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, or from the start of a unit to the end of the unit, or like how somebody said when you take it, they could take their portfolio from different grades. They could see like where they started from, where if it was third grade all the way to fifth grade, and I think that'll be pretty cool. Um, in my classroom, whether it be like digital or paper portfolio, um, I say like they could like include like a short reflection explaining like what they learned and like what they're proud of and like what they want to improve on next. And just like this strategy, why I think it's just so important is that like it builds ownership and motivation. So like when they look back at their older progress, they could think like, wow, like I really improved here. And then, that sense of growth is really powerful. And it helps them see that the effort and the reflection like actually leads to actual results. And I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my notes real quick. But I think somebody else also mentioned this about portfolios, just like how they could show it to their parents as well. I think like as a teacher, we could also use those portfolios at student teacher conferences. So like even the parents could see the students' progress from whether it be to start from the beginning of the year to the end, or from the first unit to the last unit, whatever it may be. Um, so instead of just a grade, because just looking at the grades on the report cards, even as a parent, they not probably are not understanding that this is just a work in progress. So I think the portfolio will help them also see that too. So overall, I just feel confident about the portfolio tracking because it just fits perfectly with like how I think learning should be visible and it should be reflected and student centered. And it's not just about like collecting papers, but it's about like proof of growth. And I think that's what assessment of learning is all about.
I had question number 4. What part of the chapter makes you feel uncertain, nervous, or hesitant about applying in practice? And I apologize that when I was talking about the objective, I tried to tie the question into it, but it's all good. I'm gonna just kind of rephrase it. One thing that I did want to state with that was that students remaining positive while learning their own strengths and needs. That's something that I think also makes me nervous, as well as showing students the importance of the formative and summative assessments, because students do a lot of progress monitoring things in my classroom, but I also want them to realize that even though things are for a grade, they're not always necessarily for a grade. So just kind of placing emphasis on that, like the different progress learning and things that they would be able to monitor, assignments like exercises, problems, tests, homework, trial and error, feedback, revision. Those are things that would be more of a practice or more of a formative assessment. And summative assessments is something that we wouldn't really apply in the EC classroom, because those summative assessments really consist of like their EOGs and like stuff like that. So my job would be to kind of prepare them based on their IEP codes for that. So just kind of them staying positive and realizing that even though they may be behind, they still are going to make progress, and to just stay positive. That is something that I'm hesitant about, because I have seen how sometimes when students don't see their scores going fast as they want, that will discourage them. So just kind of finding ways to keep that positive. That was something that I wanted to note. And I think that was pretty much it for question 4, but I wanted to tie back into it.
All right, so to conclude the podcast, so chapter 10 brings together the central theme of student involved assessment by showing how powerful learning becomes when students take responsibility for collecting and reflecting on evidence in their own progress. Um, Chapter 10 also emphasizes that record keeping is not just a teacher task, it's a learning skill that students must develop. The chapter's key idea is that students need structured opportunities to record, analyze, and interpret their assessment results. So this process transforms assessment data into meaningful information for that students can use to guide their next steps. By keeping journals, reflection logs, or digital portfolios, students begin to see connections between daily assignments and long-term goals. Um, so as I said earlier, they can shift from asking like, what did I get on this assignment, to what did I learn from this assignment? Another major point is the importance of reflection and metacognition. When students write about what they did well, where they struggled, or how they plan to improve, they deepen their understanding of content and their awareness of how they learn. This habit of reflection builds confidence, self-direction, and ownership. Um, and lastly, in the chapter, it highlights portfolios as a practical and empowering way for students to document growth. Portfolios provide visible proof of learning over time, support goals, goal-setting conversations and allow students to take pride in their achievements. So overall, Chapter 10 reinforces when students are directly involved in collecting and interpreting their own evidence of learning, assessment becomes more than an evaluation. It becomes an active and continuous process of growth for the students. The students can learn to see themselves not just as test takers, but as managers of their own learning journey. And that is all we have for Chapter 10.